I want to start by saying my name is Tracy Rowling. I'm the Experience Director at Futurise here in Berlin. And this event is a kind of a newer format for us. It's called Show and Tell. So for those who don't know, Futurise is what we call a networked organization, which means that one of the really important parts of our culture is sharing information, sharing knowledge, sharing learnings across disciplines, across cultures, across organizations as well. So one of the ways that we make this happen are events like this. In normal times, we would have the event in person, but since we are not really able to do that anymore, we're having them online. Show and tell is a kind of common elementary school practice in some cultures where a kid brings something from home and then shows it to the rest of the class and tells why it's important to them. So we're kind of playing off of that same format, bringing people from inside Futurise and from outside Futurise to share information, learning, knowledge. It's a pretty informal kind of format. So sometimes it's more well-known speakers. Sometimes it's a developer or a designer or a strategist from inside Futurise who just has something exciting that they want to share with other people. Sometimes it's more rough. Sometimes it's more polished. Today we have two really great speakers ready to talk about their experiences in design leadership. But first, oops, I have to, there we go. We have Andy Polaine and Melanie Dreser, but before you get to hear all of the great stuff that they're going to tell you, you have to listen to a little bit about Futurise. First, Futurise is the hashtag that you should use if you decide that you want to post on your Tweetagrams or Facebook, LinkedIn, whatever, about the event, or if somebody says something really exciting and you want to repeat it, we would love it if you use the hashtag Futurise for that. And Futurise is, more importantly, an independent innovation consultancy. We have 8 offices in 5 countries, including 3 offices in Germany, 1 in Berlin, 1 in Munich, and 1 in Stuttgart. We are originally coming from Finland. We do all kinds of things. We have a very strong interdisciplinary practice inside of our organization. So we don't define ourselves as a design agency or as a tech agency. We really work in interdisciplinary teams, including some combination of technologists, designers, researchers, data scientists, organizational design, culture experts, and strategists. We also work across all different industries. We're absolutely industry agnostic, and we work in almost any industry you can think of, or our clients work in almost any industry you can think of. If you would like to know more about what that actually is and what the projects actually are, you can go to futurise.com/work after the event, not now, and check that out. That's our motto, love the problem. And these are kind of our guidelines for the event. Keep yourself muted, but if you can keep your camera on, that's awesome. We're going to have a Q&A at the end of both talks. So we won't do a talk, a Q&A, and a talk and a Q&A. We'll do both talks because they're very closely interlinked and have a lot of different takes on the same topics. So we'll have 2 talks and then Q&A at the end. If you're comfortable doing so, turn your microphone on, raise your hand, and you can say your question out loud. Or if you feel like there are just too many people in the call to get noticed, you can also just write your question into the chat in the Google Hangout, and then we can call on you in the Q&A part to say your question out loud or read it for you if you don't feel like it. Oops, went backwards. So these are our 2 speakers for today. Melanie is going to be first, and Andy's going to be next. And I'm sorry that I'm completely incapable of multitasking, so I can't click a button on the screen and talk at the same time. So do that first. So until about 2014, Futurice was actually primarily an engineering house. And when the decision was made to expand our influence with clients by bringing in design research and strategy, Melanie was one of the key people responsible for building that design competency and organization inside of the company, not only here in Germany, but also in the company as a whole. Today, she holds the role of principal designer in Berlin, and she is responsible for building basically our business strategy around design, among many other things. She also takes care a lot of the designers inside of the organization and how they have a career path and what kind of roles we offer to designers who we hire. Melanie also sits on the Futurice board of directors, which is very impressive to me anyway. I know Melanie as an exceptionally thoughtful person who brings both breadth and depth into everything that she does. And this quality really shines through in the talk that she's about to give. She's going to explain the impact that design leadership has or should have from the self out to society. And she also has some really well-grounded ideas that she's going to talk about that have helped her personally grow and stay grounded to avoid the imposter syndrome feelings that come up along the way. So Melanie, please enlighten us.
Hello, good evening, everyone. I'm super thrilled that so many of you joined on a Friday evening after a full and long week of work. I saw that we have an audience from across the globe, so maybe good morning or good afternoon to some of you. It's really exciting to have you on board. As Tracy said, my name is Melanie Dreser, and I'm a designer by background and also by heart. I had the opportunity in my career to work on many different impact levels of design, from actually doing design myself to leading projects, building design teams, and lately being a member of the board of directors. In case you wonder actually what does a board do, in the case of Futurise, the board's primary role is to ensure that the organization has a good strategy and is properly managed, so that board is responsible for hiring the CEO, sparring with the C-level and other country leaders, and it also ensures that the interests of the company and its shareholders are taken into account. So as you see already here, it's not the typical design leadership work anymore, and this also relates to my belief that design leadership is not only about understanding and developing leadership skills. That's just the starting point. It's about growing impact all the way up to the organization and beyond. And that's also the journey I'm personally on, and I'm going to take you along within the next 15 minutes. Along my journey, I learned two things that are beyond abstract descriptions of leadership qualities. Leadership is first and foremost people business, and the things you do and focus on your everyday life directly influence your future and therefore your career trajectory. This is also why I apply usually a bit of a strategic thinking to career development. And hereby, I don't mean that you can or should plan every step of your career, because some opportunities just open up without you being aware of them in advance. But it does mean that you should be aware how and where you can have an impact with your skills, with your personality, and with your background. That's why I believe it's important to think about leadership development on an impact level, on a people level, and they all intersect. Understanding what drives different people at each level is the core to succeed. Since on the one hand, this understanding will help you to inspire and motivate people towards the same goal and vision, and secondly, help you to find your own sweet spot. With our limited time today, I will reflect on two key impact areas and share some personal experiences along the way. So the starting point is the personal level, and it's all about you, because before you think about leading others, you really need to be able to lead yourself, so-called self-leadership. It's about understanding yourself, constant self-reflection, goal setting, being able to work towards these goals successfully, and understanding what might trigger you and what your blind spots are. And ideally, you surround yourself with people that cover these blind spots, because we all have them. And independent from any hard, soft, or interpersonal skills you might want to develop, I believe the following are the 2 key areas to develop as a leader, or at least they helped me along my career so far. One is, don't try to be like someone else or follow any abstract leadership description, because be you. Remember, leadership is people business, and we humans are really damn good in seeing through the fluff and looking behind the facade. This means present yourself in a genuine way and sincerely, and you get way further than trying to run after any abstract ideal. Sometimes it might not seem so in the short term, but it sure will help you in the mid and long term. When I personally moved into the role in my past as a design director, I went from being a peer to my design colleagues to being a leader and supervisor. And first I tried to fill the shoes of the previous design director, but then quickly realized it's better to bring my own shoes and not trying to handle things like him, because I have my own values, my own personality, and my own strength I bring to the table. Also, a colleague of mine once asked me, how do you actually stay authentic as a woman in a leadership position when it often is seen as a weakness to not know? And my answer was simple. I don't think that authenticity means that you have to be an open book and show everyone all your vulnerabilities. To me, means it's staying true to your own values and don't trying to change your personality. So I personally don't pretend to know everything, and I believe nobody should expect from anyone to know everything, because you don't become Wikipedia just because you step up in a leadership position. In case you don't know something, I tell them I will get back to you with an answer. Then I will make sure I ask my colleagues, experts, and then I actually get back with an answer. So this doesn't mean you should not prepare or anticipate for any questions that might arise and be able to answer them. It just means everyone is human and cannot know everything, so don't pretend to. And secondly, what helped me along this way is the love of learning. So being passionate about learning, no matter if it's about acquiring new skills, topics, or new bodies of knowledge, listen, ask for feedback, act on it. It really helped me, this love of learning, to actually, it enables me to persist in the face of frustration or obstacles that arise during your career and during your daily or monthly work life. Because let's be honest, we all go through these rough patches. Also, in this area, I believe it's about finding your sweet spot that creates the most value for you, your organization, your team, and your client. I think it all has to do with a growth mindset, embracing challenging, persisting in the face of setback, and seeing the efforts as a path to grow and learn from criticism. And this is not always an easy task. So I developed my personal hack to keep learning, because if I want to learn something, sometimes I might lack the necessary focus. Therefore, I usually commit to a certain goal that forces me to work towards something. So I might apply for a conference talk, and the deadline will force me to build on my expertise and keep learning in the proposed areas. Besides that, it helps me personally to align my learning areas with the areas that have an impact beyond myself. So an impact on the team, on the organization, or on the clients. And then I see a mutual benefit, which helps me again to grow within my career. The second step I would like to discuss you is actually this interesting move when you actually move further along the design leadership impact levels. there's this interesting transitioning happening between the team level and the levels beyond. All of a sudden, your scope and impact grows beyond design. All of a sudden, it's not about leading design anymore, but holistic leadership, including all aspects of people in your organization. It might be tech, engineering, R&D, no matter if it's marketing, sales, internal function. This transition puts many of us out of the comfort zone because we're not familiar anymore with the territory. And especially here, I see the imposter syndrome kick in. We doubt our accomplishment and talents because we're acting in a totally new space beyond design. And I actually went through this transition when joining the Futurice board of directors 1.5 years ago. What helped me to go through this dip is to trust my own talents and accomplishment, but staying humble at the same time, since I was going through another learning and growth sprint. Paula Scheer, the partner pentagram, once phrased it very nicely. It's through mistakes that you can actually grow. You have to get bad in order to get good. And when you grow in new levels, it means you're learning something new. You might be in a new environment, in a new role. You certainly have other people around you whose life or work you affect, and vice versa. So be humble about these opportunities. Ask if you don't know, because there's at least always one person who doesn't know but pretends to. So my personal mantra is not knowing and asking is a sign of strength. Not knowing and not asking is a recipe for failure. When actually applying for the board position, I made sure I listed both what I could bring to the table, even if all the other board members had way more experience than I had. But I also had something to bring to the table. But I also listed what I could learn, because understanding what you don't know but would like to learn is a key for growth. And that's what I mean with humility. Some of you might wonder why I bring empathy here as another point. Isn't it as important overall? Well, yes, it is. But in my experience, empathy is getting a very complex task the more your impact increases. Because the amount of people with different, sometimes and more often conflicting needs, fears and goals increase. If you think it's hard to be empathetic sometimes with your client, with your colleagues, with your team, then think about different teams in your organization. Maybe even different offices across the globe with diverse cultural expectation, or shareholders or boards of investors if you're in a startup. It's not easy to empathize with so many different people and groups, but I believe it's very, very important in order to achieve your goals and taking your organization into the future and the people around you along with you. I personally have to openly admit that sometimes I still feel certain negative emotional reactions when I see some people dealing or communicating in a certain way about things. I might think, why are they doing this? But then I constantly have to remind myself, and I do, to first assume good intentions. It's about asking for the why to help empathize with people's point of view and their situations and actions. But this doesn't mean that you have to accept every BS. It just means empathize first and do not judge first without understanding. In summary, I think there are many different ways how you can increase your impact beyond the application of your design skills. I think the only thing that stays constant is everything you do is affecting other people. So use your strength and actually your design mindset to understand these people's needs and how to best design for this whole experience for everyone. And don't stop dreaming about where your path may lead you, because the only limit to your impact is your imagination and your commitment, and it can go beyond your organization, even on a societal level. So thanks for listening. I hope that some of my thinking and stories sparked some inspiration within you. And if you want to connect, you can find me on LinkedIn or on Twitter, and as well on Instagram under Mama Leaders, since I'm the host of a podcast. And in each episode, I actually interview women in leadership positions or successful female founders. And we talk about their career journey and how they align career and being a mother in this case. Because one thing is sure, we all have more facets beyond our professional life. And if this interests you, feel free to tune in. And but you have to speak German because it's in German. Thank you.
Thank you. I would love if everybody put on their camera who can, so that Melanie can see. It's always so tricky in these online things that you don't get the rush of the applause that you normally should get. I'm just going to remind you all that we have a Q&A at the end after Andy's talk. So hold your questions for the moment, or you can drop them in the chat. That's also fine, and then we'll get to them at the end. So Melanie's going to stop sharing her slides, and Andy's going to get his set up while I tell you a little bit more about Andy Polaine, our second talker, who is, many of you will already know him from his work as an author, public speaker, and a podcaster. He's the co-author of the book Service Design from Insight to Implementation, and he also writes a popular newsletter called Doctor's Note, and is the host of the Power of 10 podcast, which is a really great source for people who are thinking big about design and interdisciplinary practice. I listened this morning to the latest episode where he's interviewing Molly Wright Stinson, and they are talking about the connections between architecture and digital design, which are very surprising and also very obvious once you are told them. It's a really great conversation, and I had a great time with it this morning. Andy has been thinking about the meaning and purpose of design leadership since he started his own personal journey down that path 20 years ago. He is here to share some things that he has learned not only from his own experience, but also from many years of coaching and mentoring others on their path to design leadership. And we feel very privileged to welcome you, Andy, to our show and tell. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. God, what a way to get the imposter syndrome going, just straight off. Thank you for the intro of someone else. So, first of all, I feel like I could do a very quick version of this, which is of everything Melanie just said. So I was nodding along for those of you who saw. What I thought I'd do is I talk about my own pathway a little bit and explain, and then a few things that I guess I've discovered along the way, a bit like Melanie. There's a picture of someone laying a table for a dinner party here because I've got a little bit of a sort of gripe about, you often see on LinkedIn profiles these things about descriptions which say driving results and driving growth and stuff. And I often think, well, who are you driving there? When we talk about driving people, a lot of the time we drive sheep and we drive cattle, and it doesn't feel like a terribly nice way to kind of think about leadership. And I've come to think of leadership as enablement, enabling more than leading, and enabling in both senses. So when it goes well, you're enabling people well, and you're enabling them to do their work, which mostly means getting out the way or getting things out the way of them doing what they can do well. Because, we hire smart people, we interview them, we hire adults, and then treat them like kids sometimes. But the other thing is that enablement it has this negative connotation, like you have with addiction. You can enable bad behaviors, and you see it. You've seen it a lot recently in the sort of fallout in almost every industry. But leadership can enable really bad behavior, can really enable bad culture, it can enable all sorts of things. So that idea of enablement I found much more useful. So a good dinner party enables great conversation. So my own pathway here and the dip was we just did Nicola Tosic did a little interview of us the other day. It's on LinkedIn and stuff, of Anti-ROM. So this is a collective that I was part of in the very early 90s, and we were exploring kind of the really interactivity and what it meant. And it's still not a done deal. I'm the most unfashionable guy in the white shirt on the right-hand side, if you're wondering. But it was a flat structure, and so it was my first thing I did out of college. So I never went immediately into a big agency and had those kind of role models of leaders. I certainly had a role model of a mentor, which is the guy in the middle, who sadly passed away, the guy with the basketball shirt on, Andy Cameron. But we were, we kind of defined our own fate and argued a lot and all sorts of things. Anyway, so I sort of had quite a lot of success with that. And then when I left, I went to Australia, and I went to Animal Logic, which are a large visual effects company. They're the people behind like Happy Feet and Lego movies and stuff. And I went there to become the interaction director or interactive director, I think we called it, and to build up a team of people to do interaction design. Just around, it was like 2000. So the .com crash just happened like 6 months later. It was a kind of disaster on that front, just because the market just went wonky. But it was the first time that I realized, I hired a load of smart people and great people, talented people. And I thought, well, based on my Anti-ROM experience, people just get on and do their stuff. And the more I sort of get out of the way, the better they do. And they weren't, and the work wasn't quite kind of where it should be. And I couldn't really I thought, well, I better start saying something. And so I would sit and talk with our designers and people who I considered incredibly talented, and we'd discuss what was working and what wasn't. And I had this terrible imposter syndrome. I had an incredible fear that they were going to turn around and say, well, you do it then. And I would have to say, I can't. But I then realized that the work started to get a lot better. And it's at that moment I realized, oh, right. So now I'm designing with people. Actually, my job is to kind of design the team, and my job is to design the culture. And these people are my medium, as it were, to do that. And like anyone, I also realized, oh, yeah, I know what's happened here. They've got too close to their work. They're not really sure what's going on, which one to choose. And as we have the discussion, it kind of helps them give that extra direction. And it might seem really obvious, but it was a kind of moment of like a real penny dropped for me. And then I also realized something else, which was I started doing less work on the tools. And I jokingly said the last kind of 5 or 6 years, I basically designed PowerPoint and Keynote slides. As you start to, and I wrote this little piece the other day, and I kind of drew this quick sketch for it about the design leadership dip, which was definitely something that I experienced, which is as you start to let go of the tools, and I used to be pretty good on the tools, you kind of got to that mastery of your tools, and then you start to let go, but just at the same time as you're taking on the role of design leadership, and you're not that great at design leadership. And so there's this dip in the middle where you're kind of not as good at your tools, and you're also you're kind of rubbish at both, or not very good at both. And it can be quite an existential crisis. Now, for me, I was about 29, 30 when that happened. I now coach quite a lot of people. Definitely kind of happens, for most people it happens a little bit later, but there's definitely this kind of moment that people professionally go through where that happens. Now, I've seen people tackle this in different ways. I've seen some people who've straddled this very well and have become sort of craft leaders as well as becoming design leaders. And there are different ways of doing it. But most people go through this dip. And it causes a bit of an existential crisis because if we were talking before about this, it's true of other professions like engineering, medical professions. And I'm sure it's true of quite a few things where you give up your craft and you become a leader of it. I think designers in particular have a self-identity with their craft much more than many other professions. So, you know, it starts, I think, in school where you say, oh, I want to get into kind of design or the arts or something. There's lots of teachers and relatives who kind of go, oh, yeah, well, that's a bit of a kind of risky business, don't know. And you either commit to it or you're not, or you don't, and you go and do something else. If you commit to it, then you also commit to a life of, you know, ambiguity, if not very clear-cut kind of pathways. Unlike if you sort of climb the corporate ladder. And it's one of the reasons why, you know, as people know, I used to work at Fjord that are part of Accenture. It's one of the reasons why the sort of cultural, it's not really a clash, but the cultural differences between design and a kind of large corporate organizations, that's one of the things that's going on. Don't really understand that kind of personal nature of it. So I went to Fjord. So in between, I taught a great deal, and I still do. And teaching, as Melanie was talking about learning, teaching is one of the best ways to learn. But also, I mentored and coached a lot of students from bachelor's to master's and postgraduate students, and really got a good sense of how people block themselves and how to kind of get them through. And also got a good sense of, I've watched so many pitches. I've worked out the other day, I've seen like about 3,000 presentations over the years, and it really kind of set my eye in for kind of what works and what doesn't in the storytelling of a presentation. So I went to Fjord and to become a design director there, and eventually was the global group director for Fjord Client Evolution, which was the part of Fjord Evolution was there to kind of train all the other Fjordians and quite a lot of our clients. And my job was to train client teams in design and innovation and mentor them. And I realized through that quite a lot of what I just talked about, quite a lot of the leaders of those teams were going through that dip. And I kind of had, you know, my own imposter syndrome and worries about joining Fjord and so forth, whether I could cut it or not. And when this particular photo became a meme in the studio, I knew I had to kind of somehow made it, and that I'd been accepted in some way, that made me feel like, okay, people feel comfortable enough to lightly ridicule me, and that means I'm kind of doing something well. I also realized that most of my work was 90% conversations. So most of what I was doing and most of the difficult parts on projects, once designers get even just a few years under their belt, almost all the stuff that is difficult in projects, it's not design stuff. I don't think well, maybe once or twice, but I very rarely had a design team struggling with the design problem. We don't know what to do here. We don't know what we should be designing. Sometimes with synthesis, it was a bit difficult, like, you know, so much of it. Almost always, it's like, we've got this problem with this stakeholder, with this person, something in the team and all of that. And I realized it was really kind of all about that. Now, for stakeholders, quite often, if anyone's done any kind of extreme sports or anything like that, you know, it's for stakeholders, it's often, particularly for some clients, it's like the first time they've ever sort of done this design thing. And it can feel to them a bit like this. So this is me skydiving over Townsville Beach in Australia. I don't know how it's coming across on Google. This guy who's incessantly sticking his tongue out, I was like his 10th jump that day, and he probably was doing like 20 jumps a day or something. For him, it was like another day at the office. For me, it was the first time I jumped out of this plane. And my brain, before that smile kicked in, my brain just was going, like, all alarms going, you know, what have you done? You've just jumped out of a plane. And I realized kind of actually for clients, it feels like that quite often. You know, this mismatch between where we're at and where they're at, it feels like that quite a lot. So a lot of kind of what we're doing is actually in that leadership is actually working out how to kind of signal that stuff better and take them through it. And the good thing about it is you can use a lot of the skills you already have. I've been thinking about this a lot, and sort of as I've been doing coaching as well, and realizing that a lot of the kind of stuff when people talk about managing upwards, they talk about, you know, working out loud and all of those things, is that design leadership in general, also setting up teams and setting up departments and stuff, is kind of like slow motion facilitation. In the sense that, you know, I've often said that most design methods exist because telepathy doesn't. What you're trying to do is extract ideas from someone's head, whether that's your end users or customers or whatever, or whether it's stakeholders and so on. The reasons why you've got so many post-it notes on the wall is because you're trying to make that, achieve that telepathy, right? You're trying to get, and this thing that I've got in my head and I'm trying to put it in your head. One of designers' secret superpowers that they completely take for granted is that you can make ideas tangible, whether it's a sketch or a prototype. That for other people can seem like magic, but it's incredibly potent, because once you get past the arguing about an idea, which you can have forever, and actually have a thing, an artifact in front of you, you can actually have a decent conversation about it. And you have kind of many of those moments of, oh, now I see that, I completely get it. Or now I see that, I realize we're completely misaligned. And what we don't do often enough is take people on the journey with us. This is a very famous internet meme. So again, it can kind of feel like this to stakeholders, but it can feel like, so the managing upwards thing, why do they need to know all of this stuff? It's because it feels like this, right? You've just gone from some circles to the fucking hour. And so all the things that you do in facilitation, for example, like you're reading the room, you're working out who's been invited, who hasn't, who's been included or excluded, what are the kind of power structures going on, what tools, methods, spaces, things like food, do we need in the room? What's the cadence of the day? There's classically sort of divergence and convergence, but also, how is it? What's the sort of energy levels going on? Are people engaged? Are they disengaged? Is there someone at a table who's supposed to be working together, and there's, how sometimes you get like sort of 4 people are working together and there's one person just sitting off on the side, and they're either kind of checking their phone or they're somehow ignored by the others and stuff. Sometimes you get a saboteur who kind of at the back, who's always kind of talking loud, and you have to work out how to kind of not focus the entire room's energy around that person. I was going to say around him. It usually is a him. I've decided that kind of a lot of strategic thinking amongst men is kind of guys having really loud opinions. And, so some things are about kind of, do we need some structure here, or do we need to kind of get everyone to be crazy? A classic thing at the end of a workshop, sometimes with sort of client stakeholders, a bunch of chatbots and drone ideas. And sometimes you need to have what Mark Curtis used to call a moment of madness to kind of get everyone to think differently. And sometimes everything's all up in the air. You need to bring some structure in. And I've really found that with teams too, as well as directing teams, that, sometimes they need one or the other, and reading that is a really important part of it. And there's things like kind of, do we work together? Do we work apart? Mystery and reveal and all of those things. And of course, errors and corrections and improvisation. So, a lot of those skills you have, if you imagine those, if it's a project, it's kind of like, imagine a workshop's like a project basically, but just done in a day or two. If you imagine that going over time and stretching out, many of the things that you're doing are actually the same. And the really good thing is that you've already got a lot of those skills. When I do sort of leadership training with people who haven't come through that background, more of a corporate background, they have to learn all of that stuff from scratch. And sometimes it's quite hard work. So I'm going to end with a few, how am I doing for time? I'm going to end with a few lessons from coaching. So I do a lot of design leadership coaching, and I coach either, leaders of, designers who are leaders, who are in leadership positions, design directors and people like that. And also leaders of designers, so people who are running design teams and departments. I say design broadly, customer experience, design and innovation, who might not have a design background themselves. The first thing that comes up, and this is the one that's the most important, is you need to start putting in time and boundaries, or making time and boundaries. You spend the first half of your career kind of adding things, right? It's a very additive process. You take more on, you take more on, and take more on. You can't keep on doing it. If you move into a leadership position and you take more and more on, you get really strung out. And when you're really strung out, you're not very good to anyone. And it's really just not very good to you. So the first thing is I get people to kind of start taking meetings and stuff out of their calendars and start protecting how they use email and putting in boundaries around that sort of stuff. And the reason why is, without doing that, you don't have the space to think. You don't have the space to kind of think about yourself. And it drives me nuts that CEOs are the kind of most busy people. I actually feel it should be the opposite, right? Because they have to make some of the biggest decisions, and yet often they're like, well, I can give you 6 minutes with him, and you've got, it has to have, it can only be 4 slides. And you think, well, this is actually quite a nuanced, quite a complex thing. Take some time. The other thing is the imposter syndrome that Melanie talked about. It's actually originally in the original research on this, it's called the imposter phenomenon, which I prefer, because syndrome sounds like, oh, I've got it and I can never get rid of it. Phenomenon is a thing that comes and goes. And one of the things is that everyone else is making it up as they go along. And that's the biggest realization as you kind of head into that second part of your career. And it's slightly disappointing because you're hoping that someone is going to tell you the truth of, the secret to how the world works. But one of the things about being a leader means that there's no one ahead of you, right? So there's no one else to kind of ask. There's no one apart from, maybe some peers, but it's your job to decide, oh, this is what we're going to do. And you're likely to be making it up. But like good jazz musicians, you know your scales, you've your chord progressions, the kind of 40-odd jazz standards, and you've got the experience. So although you're improvising, it's not just kind of completely making it up. I walked past this guy the other day when I was in Italy, and this fisherman, and he was cleaning and mending his nets, and he does this every day, right? So you really need to spend some time. That's the inner work, right? You need to actually make sure that your kind of personal psychological hygiene is there. If you don't, you tend to get really burnt out. But not only that, the worst thing is you inflict it on everyone else, right? The shining example of this is Donald Trump, right? And imagine we're all kind of anxious about the November elections, and he's in a country that I don't live in, I'm not a citizen of, and yet, I get anxious about it. The ripples of his kind of issues ripple out, and it really happens a lot in organizations too, right? So the more you have that kind of work sorted, the more you can tell, oh, that's a sort of complex that's been triggered in me, that's something where I'm kind of acting out on all of those things. I can't tell you how often this comes up. This is really the nub of the coaching I do. And you do all of that in order to find the shape of you. You start off your career by trying to sort of fit yourself into a certain a round peg into a round hole, and then you realize you're a square peg and you try and look for the right a square hole. This comes from Josh Seiden, who kind of said this to me, and then you realize, oh, hang on, I'm an Andy shaped peg, and the final thing is to make your own damn hole, which is finally what you're aiming to do is to be authentic to yourself and make the role that fits you, rather than try and bend yourself out of shape to fit another role. Because when you do that, all of the kind of bad stuff starts to happen again, because you're not being authentic, and it takes time. And the paradox about imposter syndrome is the more you're prepared to be vulnerable and reveal yourself, the less imposter syndrome you have. So that's my views and thoughts on design leadership. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Andy. Everybody, turn up your microphones. Let's do some real applause. Let's try it. Thanks. I think that works. I think it works. All right. That was wonderful. Thanks, Andy and Melanie, both. That was really interesting. I'm sure that our audience has some questions. And we can't see, we are about 80 people in the meeting. So I see, Andre, you have your microphone off. Maybe you want to start us off with a question? Oh, you put your you put yourself on mute.
No, sorry, I have a microphone which has a mute button, but I'm definitely taking on the prime opportunity to ask Andy a question. And that is the question of, like, sometimes you become aware, or you start working on several different areas, especially in phases where you're looking for a new direction. And I wanted to know, what kind of strategies did you employ in your life, maybe just out of your experience, in order to kind of like bet on something and leave the other areas behind? Was there ever a situation where you felt like, okay, I feel there are like 3 or 4 directions where I could go, but now it's like the sunken cost bias is holding me kind of undecided, and now I have to like go in and put the dollar and in the career bucket and just go with it for a year or two?
Yeah, all the time. I mean, massively. I can't tell you how long I agonized about the decision to move from Germany. So I'm English, as you can hear, and I lived in Germany for 10 years. I lived in Australia for 7 years, lived in Germany for 10 years, went to Australia to work for Fjord for 2.5 years, and came back again. The decision to move my entire family and household across halfway across the world and back again twice. Those are kind of quite long, agonizing decisions. A couple of things, I guess. One is, and I've got better at it actually now. My wife will tell you I'm so terribly indecisive about that stuff because I have awful FOMO. So the one thing is, if I don't do this thing, am I going to, particularly if it's a thing you kind of fear. So if I don't do this thing, am I going to, in 10 years time, 5 years time, look back on that and always think, I wonder if, or not? In which case is often a kind of pretty good sign that you should probably have a go at it. The second thing is to completely catastrophize. So we do it most of the time when we're kind of anxious about stuff, but to sort of employ it intentionally is quite useful. So to think through, what's the worst thing that can happen and what would happen now? And, that, happens in coaching quite a lot where someone's kind of not sure whether to leave their job or not. Most people are much safer than they kind of really think they are, even right now. And I'm aware, I am talking from or we all are probably here, talking from a position of structural privilege, right? That there are people who do have to do jobs that they aren't safe and are kind of miserable because they have no other options. But quite a lot in the sort of situation that we are in, most of the time you can't undo things, but you can often go back to doing things. They're never. The worst thing is, I think, is the regret to not have done something you thought you would like to have done. So that's one thing. And I guess the other thing is, where's your energy at? So, you see it sometimes. You start speaking to people about the different options they have, and one of them, a couple of them, let's say they've got 3 things. 2 of them they're a little bit kind of intellectual about, heady about, and the third one, as they start talking about it, they just light up. And they're really engaged, and that's where their energy is. And your body and your psyche and your unconscious don't lie on that front, and it's often a good sign that that's where you should be. That's the decision and the direction you should be going in. I forgot to put this in, but I talked about you building up stuff in the first half of your career. It's so much more difficult to let stuff go, and that's really what the second half of that is, and that's what you're sort of moving into as you get into leadership. Letting go of stuff is really tough.
I would love to hear some thoughts from Melanie as well on this topic, because I know for sure that's been a big issue for you over the course of like the last 5 or 6 years even. How do you make those choices?
First of all, I fully agree with what Andy said. It's about imagining the worst case scenario usually strengthens you, because it's never as bad as you might think it be without thinking it through. And I think it's also about where your energy and passion lies. And what I apply additionally, I think, what are the opportunities beyond the current opportunity wherever you go? So is it the end stage there, or do I have a growth path also within the next step? Because at some point you want to grow further, and yes, you can switch your path again, but I always take into consideration what's actually the step above. Do I see any growth or any new opportunities that might arise? I might not be ready at this point for it, and I might have a lot to learn, but even having the option to think ahead in one or the other direction you take is, for me personally, very motivating, and usually that's how I made choices. And then I personally I'm not good at making lists and comparison. In the end, I listen to my gut feeling, and usually it drove me always in the right direction.
We have a question in the chat from Christian Wikström. Christian, do you want to say the question, or do you prefer that I read it?
No, I can probably try.
Excellent.
Yes. So when you showed, Andy, when you showed the design leadership, when that takes off and when your own design craft starts to metal down a little bit, for me as a junior, I'm wondering, do I need to master? Is it a requirement for me to master the craft of design before thinking or even moving into a career in design leadership? I usually say it like hard skills versus soft skills.
Yeah, we had a little pre-conversation before yesterday about this, and there was sort of question around whether service designers in particular, who are kind of used to that sort of a lot of stakeholder and disciplinary facilitation, if you like, as part of their skills, whether they're kind of more attuned, if you like, to this role or not. I'm not, as I kind of said about the 90% of the problems you have are people problems on projects. That bit happens quite quickly. I guarantee, so someone who's maybe not completely junior, but sort of junior to mid-weight person, you've pretty much actually got your craft down, and quite often got your craft down better, or the hard skills better than others. There's a kind of crossover that as people move up into sort of senior designer craft roles, if you like, where it's an awful lot about how you communicate about your craft and how you manage to persuade people of the kind of the rationale behind the things you've done and how you manage to work together with other people and so forth. That's actually what it soon switches into, that progression. I don't think I've ever had a conversation about someone moving into a senior or design director or lead or kind of design director role where we've had a conversation about their craft skills not being up to scratch. But other than that, they're a really great leader. That's a kind of baseline given. But what I actually think they become less and less important. It's hard to lead people in a craft. It's hard to be like a craft lead if you're not very good at it yourself. But craft, I think, is can be interpreted very, very broadly. Like, you could just be really great with people and facilitation, for example. That's a craft. I don't know if I've answered your question, but that's my answer.
Thank you.
I know that this is actually a current topic for us in the design competency and Futurise, the discussion about career paths and how to make sure that we also nurture people who are not very interested in people leadership, but who are interested in real craft expertise. And Melanie, since that's really in your area of responsibility as principal designer, what are your thoughts on how you build leadership positions for craftspeople?
Really good point, and it's an ongoing discussion, and I think it's not only happening in Futurise. When I talk to my network, it's happening in so many other organizations too, because the default is that when we think about leadership, we think about leading people, leading teams, and so on. In the craft area, I think about scaling impact. And scaling impact could be by scaling your impact to people or scaling your impact through craft. And I think there are a lot of different opportunities to think along this way. So are you, if you're really, really good in your craft and want to focus on it, then think how you can actually scale your craft to other people. How can you increase your impact by coaching, sharing things, by being perceived as a leader in the outside world to clients, to others, that maybe you scale your impact through your price tag to see it financially. And I think leadership is not only about, I said it's about leading people, yes, but here you're impacting people through your craft. And you can also scale this impact in this way.
Can I just add something to this? I completely agree. And I mentioned this idea of sort of straddling the dip. And there's one person I know in particular, his name's Gabe Tamburini in Australia. And he was a very good example of someone who did exactly what Melanie is describing, which he was really good with people actually, but he was very good at his craft skills and actually on the tours doing the work, doing the doing and production stuff, and then started to shift into talking about how we can improve as a group the way we do our work, and moving into design systems and design ops, and then also being able to articulate that to clients on really massive projects. And so it's sort of by sort of default he did exactly what Melanie is saying, which is he sort of scaled his skills and his eye up and became a kind of de facto leader by doing that.
So this is we're going to stay on. So everyone who wants to stay and hang out, please. I know we've got a couple questions already on deck, so I'm not trying to rush anybody out, but I want to make sure that we take this opportunity right here, kind of on the hour, to say officially huge thank you to both Melanie and Andy, and also a really big thank you to all of you who showed up today, because the audience and the discussion that we have around the talks is really, for me, the best part of any of our events that we do here at Futurise. I also want to make one really particular thank you to someone who is a little bit quietly behind the scenes making a lot of things happen, and that is Marion. Could you wave to everybody so we can see? Marion did a lot of the legwork and hasn't been doing very much, but big applause to Marion.
Oh, there you are. Yeah, I couldn't see you.
Yeah. And also, I would like to mention Loic Sattler, who is also a design director here, who is the one who had the idea first to reach out to Andy, and I think he was the first contact person. So also really want to mention him before we make the break now into now we're just going to have the open conversation that we can keep going until we feel like we don't feel like it anymore. And Patrick, I've seen you. I'm ready for you. What's your question?
Great. Thank you very much. I am in Denver, in America, and I will not talk about Trump.
Thank you.
So, I thank you both for the presentation. I really enjoyed it. I am one of the organizers for a local meetup group called Design Leaders, and for the past couple of months, I've been doing research and interviews on a particularly challenging topic, which is there a voice in the organization you're leading for design to actually impact? Like, is there clearly, if somebody is a front-end programmer or back-end programmer, or I'm creating assets like graphic assets, those have a bottom line tangible impact on the business because it represents brand or something. But in the UX world, which is what I'm in, there's a real challenge with the research and stuff that you do that's kind of invisible, that prevents problems. So I'm curious from both of you, what are maybe, I know this is a big topic, so maybe one or two strategies or tactics you use to make sure that the design you're doing has an actual business impact, rather than just, oh, you did your journey map, or you did your surveys, or your, interaction design, all the way up to interaction design. So I'm curious your thoughts on tactically inside the organization. What do you do to make sure that design has a voice?
I can start. I think the first thing to do is make sure that everyone understands what the business is striving for and what the business goals are, and how the work you're doing are contributing, on how is it connected to the business goal itself. It's on every little project, on every little team, depending on if you work more in a consultancy or in a product company. I think this is the starting point. And then I think it's about communicating design decisions in a way that you can tie these conversations to the wider impact they have or might have, and making sure you either communicate it to the right people within the organization or within the client organizations. And if you cannot, make sure that you enable the people who are your connectors in order that they can communicate for you the wider impact. This is also a strategy, because sometimes there is a certain gate and you have to get beyond this gate in order to reach the levels up. This works. And sometimes if it's very traditional organizations, you might take someone in a certain hierarchy level from your organization to transmit the message to the hierarchy level in the other organization, because sometimes, unfortunately, still nowadays, some people really think that they only talk on the same level, and then you can bridge. So there are certain strategies, at least in my experience, I have used and that have worked, but I'm sure that there are more, and Andy can add to it.
Look, I agree. I mean, all of those, and I think there's two things. One is kind of show, don't tell. The more you can kind of show something, whether that's show a piece of evidence, show, you know, sometimes it's as simple as a video of an interview of someone trying to use a product or a service of the client, and they, you know, the board have, or the C-suite have this kind of facepalm moment. You know, it's so much better. And sometimes it's also about not talking about design. I think this is particularly true of service design, I think, where that's just the kind of method by which you're getting to an end result. And so sometimes you talk about the business and you talk about what you're trying to achieve there, rather than saying what we need is more design, what we need is more design. Because kind of what stakeholders sometimes hear is blah, 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 more design, blah, 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 hug our customers more, blah, blah, you know, and it's just not landing. So there's definitely a bit of switching of the storytelling, and as Melanie said, sometimes the language. But you know, you also you need advocates high up. Right? If you don't have it, it's very hard. And the most frustrating situation is to have someone high up demanding the results of kind of design and innovation, yet nobody in the middle actually restructuring things so that it can happen.
I have a thing to add on that, actually, which is I've worked in a lot of bigger organizations through most of my career earlier, and I've worked both in organizations that describe themselves as tech-driven and organizations that describe themselves as design-driven. So I've been my whole career either fighting for tech to be involved at earlier stages, or fighting for design to be involved in earlier stages. And I think you said something also about the driving, like, mentality. Like, you know, if you can start to get the conversation around, you know, we shouldn't be driving each other crazy. We should be doing things together and really pushing the vision of the interdisciplinary practice in technology as hard as you can, in prototyping, in customer input, you know, making sure that you have tech and design both at the very earliest stages can be a better talking point than design needs a bigger voice.
Yeah, totally true. And I think you're not, at least at Futurise, we're not selling competences or people with certain skills, but usually we have a team that solves a certain problem for the client. That's what matters, and it doesn't matter which backgrounds and skill these people have, at least to the client, obviously to the setup and to solving the problem it does. And then there's this lingo and translation work you might have to do, because the terms we might use, or as designers or tech people might use, might not resonate with the typical lingo of how the clients might describe the problem and their goals.
By the way, everyone thinks this, right? So that when you do sort of employee experience projects and do the research, anyone you speak to from any department will always say, how can I get people to understand the importance of what I do more? You know, it doesn't matter what they do. So we are not alone.
And in Denver and Boulder are such high startup culture. So it's not, let's say, like a more mature UX town like maybe, I don't know, San Diego or even San Francisco. So we're constantly fighting the battle of the 4 or 5 person company that had a developer and a bunch of salespeople. And now they have budget for UX. So the company never started with a design voice driving things. So thank you. No, you've confirmed a couple of things for me. So yay.
Okay, good.
Matthias, you have. Oh, Andy, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to jump on.
I was going to say the same. Matthias had a question. It was way up in the chat, and I didn't want it to get lost.
Yeah, thank you. So my question is to Melanie or Andy or both, or even anybody else who wants to contribute. And it's, I've found myself and still kind of find myself in a situation where, as a consequence of a reorganization, and at the same time the company acknowledging that design needs to be represented in leadership, several people got into design leadership positions. But since the reorganization was made by people who are not so familiar with design, the roles were cut in interesting ways, or rather vague. And so I was wondering, have you found yourselves in similar situation where it's unclear, hey, what's your job versus the job of a colleague, and maybe even a situation where you were not really sure, like you told in your presentations, hey, am I doing the right thing here? I'm figuring it out as I go. So with that background, how did you clarify your role and responsibility with other team members?
I personally all the time.
That's what I wanted to say.
I think this is it's like that's the way of being and living. So yes, I can answer. I've been in such a situation constantly, because with every person joining the team, you're kind of reforming before you start performing again, and have to kind of divide up things newly often. What I do, I get the people together on my level, on a level above, beyond, in order to clarify our situation, talk about each other's expectations, talk about each other's strengths, talk about what needs to be done and how can we best share it. And I cannot think about any, like, usually just laying things out makes it really clear that people don't want 100% exactly the same, but that you actually can divide things more clearly beyond any title or anything, because the title in the end doesn't really matter. It's more about what you focus on and what you can do, in my opinion.
Yeah, I would agree. Getting everyone together in a room or in a Zoom is is really kind of essential to do that work beforehand. There's a thing that's related to this. It doesn't entirely answer your question, but it's something I actually wanted to say, which was I think you're hearing or you're feeling, if you experience the results of people not realizing something, which is the further up you get, the more weight your words carry. And it's really easy to kind of become more senior, and because of imposter syndrome, actually, you kind of think, oh, well, yeah, I'll just make this off the cuff or glib remark, and it's not really that important. And then everyone's, it's the classic swoop and poop as a design director, where you come in, you go, well, that's not really working that well, and walk out again, and then the team's all spun out for the whole afternoon. And it's just the bigger version of that, of what you're talking about. So it becomes really important for that senior team who are supposed to be working together to have absolute clarity with each other. If they're not, and if there's a lot of infighting and it's impossible for them to be vulnerable with each other and so forth, sometimes they need someone to come in and facilitate an alignment session with them to do it, but they may not be in the position, or willing to do it. It's a tough one.
Okay, thank you.
Louisa, you have a question. Are you still with us? Otherwise, I would read it if you don't.
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Hey, yes, we hear you.
Yeah, sorry, I'm gonna stay off camera. My connection is not really stable. So hopefully you can hear me. Yeah, I think as this was a talk about, first of all, thank you to both of you. I nodded along to a lot of it, and especially the whole, like, you're in this stage right now where you feel quite crap at both. I recognized a lot. One thing I've noticed a lot in general, but especially with my team, is that there's like this slight aversion to taking on people leadership and wanting to only do the craft leadership. And I was wondering if both of you wanted to comment about what is it that you particularly love about people management or people leadership, assuming you love it.
Yeah.
Should I go?
Sure. Do you want to go, Melanie? Go on, you go.
I say gentlemen first this time.
Okay, all right. So to address your thing, I think it's because a lot of craft, people who want to sort of become leaders in craft and don't want to kind of go higher, it's because they don't want to do loads of meeting and admin, and don't want to let go of doing the stuff they love in their craft, which is really fair, right? There is definitely a glass ceiling, I think. If you, and I mentioned my friend Gabe, my colleague Gabe, who was kind of straddled that dip quite well. But there's definitely a bit of a glass ceiling, I think, as a craft leader within a large organization. Out there in the world, you can become kind of very well known and a kind of thought leader and a in your industry. But in terms of practical stuff like position and salary and stuff, I think there's a bit of a glass ceiling if you're not willing to kind of make that switch. So, I think you can do all of those things. You can be the craft leader and so on, like I described before with Gabe. But at some point, managing people becomes a really large part of what you do. And it's very, very hard to be sort of doing both at kind of at the highest level. So it does involve letting go of something. And that's why that kind of letting go of that craft thing creates that sort of existential anxiety. And I think it's also, there's no shame in saying, I don't want to do that. I want to just stick with my craft and become ever better at my craft. And I sort of feel we fetishize leadership a little bit. As that's where I want to be. I know a few people who have said, no, I don't want to do that. And they just have carried on they're just brilliant at what they do, craft wise. I personally, I'm not a very good designer, so I think I'm a better people person. I'm not a very good kind of craft. I'm not very patient. I'm a better writer than I am designer, actually. And I really like the kind of facilitation part and stuff and teaching and things. So I'm much better at that. So that's what attracted me to.
What I actually love about it is seeing people grow and succeed. And I think this is super fulfilling because it's like, yes, there's your own growth, but also seeing that this enablement helps other people they will grow anyway, but to skyrocket their growth or grow faster or have this steep curve in growth and in learning. And I think this is super fulfilling personally for me. Can be also sometimes frustrating at some points, but at the same time, I think overall it's a very, very nice, fulfilling experience.
Yeah.
I have one thought about that also is that I believe like religiously that people don't make great products, teams do, and when you're in the sort of team leadership role, then you can have such a bigger impact, making it possible for the team to be more than the sum of their individual parts. And that's a huge thrill, I think, to make it possible for people to work together effectively and make great things together. That's for me something that's always been really important.
No, all good points. Thank you very much.
Helen, we have a question from Helen. Are we? Oh, there you are.
Hi, Helen.
You're still muted though. You have to unmute.
Yeah. Hi, do you
We
hear
do,
me?
yes.
Yeah. Okay, perfect. Yeah, I've got a question for you both. How do you manage to break through the glass ceiling or the traditional middle management to communicate. Like, I struggle to call it the ugly truth, but sometimes it just is about a company's product, how to develop it, or rather more the lack of strategic decisions about developing products and services in a constructive way to finally have a voice or to be heard by the top management, especially in companies with with tall hierarchies and traditional culture or culture of, let's say, fear.
I've got an answer, but Melanie, do you want to go first?
You can go first. I'll add to it.
So your last word is the key to that, which is fear. And so most of the time, and this is where, again, designers have the tools, right? You're used to, walking in other people's shoes and empathy and so forth for your customers. You have to kind of turn the lens the other way. Most of what is perceived as kind of blocking or difficult behavior or kind of don't want to know about it behavior, it's almost always driven by fear and anxiety. And so understanding why those particular middle management, what is it that they need? What is it that makes them tick? Why would they be blocking this? What are they afraid of? And so sometimes it's about taking away that fear and kind of that could be using language that kind of resonates with them instead of this fluffy, funny design language. Sometimes it's about really understanding, sometimes it's very personal. It's about what's going to make them look stupid or what's going to make them look good. Sometimes it's about painting an alternative fear. So most of it's about kind of aversion to risk. And Helen, as you sort of spoke, I was particularly thinking of Switzerland, right? So the aversion to risk thing is, so we don't want to do anything. Right? Well, we don't want to do that because that's a bit risky. And so what you need to do is to paint the picture of not doing it is a greater risk. And to effectively use the fear against them, which is you paint not doing it is more, it creates more fear in them than staying with the status quo, and that sometimes kind of shifts the movement. It's one of those things also where it is a lot easier to kind of show rather than tell. Right? People respond much better to seeing things in action, seeing the research, seeing customers talk about how they can't use this thing and how much they hate the product or brand. Than it is just to tell people that in our research and so on and so forth.
Thank you, Andy.
I can fully agree to that. I think it's here a lot about empathy and understanding people's fears and goals, and especially in these traditional hierarchical organizations, the performance and the goals are often structured in quarterly goals. So understanding what the people's individual quarterly performance goals are and the organizational performance goals are might help you how you can phrase your proposal in a way that it might enable this performance, or as Andy also saw, phrase it as a risk that they might not be able to achieve certain things. It's often people are not against something or are blockers. Sometimes it's just that they have certain goals to fulfill. They have to manage certain risks we might not be aware of, and like getting insight on these risks and on these goals really helps you to phrase things differently and align it or paint a certain picture.
I think
Thank you, Melanie.
I think that's all really, really, really valid. And I also have a more tactical and less strategic tip, which is if you can just start to do things that make the user research and the design insights like normally visible everywhere, that can slowly chip away. So I've done things like creating, and we do them also in our projects with clients, like, there's a poster format that you put your top insights after every research round in, and you just put it everywhere. So then it's something like in front of every coffee machine, you've got, you know, the consumer insights, and they can't really be ignored, and it starts to be coffee conversation among all the teams, and that kind of like more tactical approach can often help as well.
Yeah, I completely agree. It slightly goes back to that original question, actually, the very first one, which was about sort of communicating the value of design. One of the things that we started to do an awful lot at Fjord was videos. You know, we had a full-time videographer in Australia for quite a long time, who used to video workshops and do edits at the workshops, because workshops are really ephemeral, right? For the senior stakeholder who wasn't there, it just feels like, what did you just went on a jaunt for a couple of days and had, you know, fun and did loads of post-it note stuff. Where's the outcome? And of course, most of it's in the bin because it was like post-it notes. And so they don't really kind of, actually the conversation was the more important thing. So videoing that stuff and seeing what was going on, capturing a few talking heads of important stakeholders afterwards. You know, frequently we had a little snippet of someone going, that was the best day I've had of my entire career at this company, and you know, we've come up with such amazing breakthrough idea, all of that stuff. Or videos that explain like a concept explainer of a new product or service that hasn't yet been built, you know, put in context, one of those kind of fictional, you know, day in the life of things or whatever it is. All of those things are great because they're not a deck that someone else is going to present and screw up the storytelling of. A video is this like encapsulated thing. It's really easy to share. You can really kind of carefully manage the storytelling of it, and that's incredibly useful.
We had a video once of a usability test where, you know, the person is speaking through what they're doing in the product, and they said, well, you know, they got stuck, and they were like, okay, now is when I open competitor application. And that video was very powerful to show in like every leadership meeting that you could possibly show it in, because it's like that there's nothing stronger than them seeing like the actual person be like, okay, now I'm going to use your competitor.
I've got a great, I don't know who did it actually, I stole it from someone at Fjord who made it. I don't know who made it at Fjord, but I had two videos of side by side. One was of two airline booking things. It was going from kind of deciding where you want to go to choosing your seat number. And on one side it was, I think, Virgin Atlantic, the other side was Lufthansa. And the Virgin Atlantic one, they're going through exactly the same process ostensibly, but the Virgin Atlantic one, the person's finished in like a kind of minute and a half. The Lufthansa one goes on for about another 2 minutes. And you know, if you force people to watch through it, they're just like, oh, this is so terrible, just make it stop. You know, it's just the most obvious example of, oh, right, now I get why the UX is really important.
Yeah,
right?
those are really great ideas. Thank you very much.
Anybody else have anything that they want to say or ask? It doesn't necessarily have to be a question. I think we have people in the room who have a lot of experience as well. Are there any like last words for the... All right, going once, going twice. Last words. Okay, then I'm going to turn it on to Andy and Melanie, of course, to give the real last words before we say goodnight to everybody. And one more time, thanks to everybody, the last 20 hardcore sticking it out to the end of the conversation, people. I really hope that next year, this time, those of you who aren't coming from other cities or from other countries, that we get to see you here in our event space in Berlin, and we can, you know, have a beer together and have these conversations in person. Melanie, Andy, last words.
My last words are just thanks for joining. It was great, and I more than the presentation, I actually enjoyed the discussions and the insights at the end. And I think these are often the most fruitful parts in order to also hear diverse voices. And I really enjoyed the format of having more than one person answering.
You're muted, Andy. You've got your cough button on again.
I was muted twice. That was brilliant. So first of all, yes, thank you very much indeed. Thank you for the invite, and thank you for everyone who's listening, particularly these who are kind of, those of you who are staying on at the end. Last points. You know, everyone goes through this, right? And everyone is still going through, as you can hear, you know, this isn't none of this is solved problems, and because people change all the time, the world changes all the time. And so it really is about enjoying and becoming sort of comfortable with the journey of it, rather than kind of trying to find. That's perhaps one of the differences with the craft, right? That to craft is that it's never something you kind of truly master. It's always different, and becoming comfortable with that is really the essence of life, actually.